to make these concepts more accessible to people. There's been a lot written on them, and unfortunately I think a lot of what has been written on some of the advanced techniques, while you can understand it if you have a rigorous mindset or you're willing to invest a whole lot of time in trying to figure it out, not everybody can do that, and so I think that's been an obstacle too. So I am very much trying to make these techniques much more accessible to people, and things easier for people to understand. So I'm glad that I'm accomplishing that. We got a comment here from somebody. Sorry for being late. Do not worry about being late. That's fine. Remember that the slides and the entire presentation is recorded, so you can always catch up on the parts that you missed. So if you get held up, and I understand how that works, don't worry about it. You can always catch up on the part you missed by listening to the recordings, which are always posted within a few days after the end of the webinar. A comment from Keith Hamilton from TransCore here. Good to see you online, Keith. Two comments. In using decision tables as test cases, I found it helps make the test case more readable by renaming what you refer to as actions to results. After all, what we were doing is verifying test results. And then insert a middle row between conditions and results called event. The event will specify whatever action the tester takes to generate the results, such as hit submit button. Aha! Okay, that's an interesting suggestion, Keith. Yeah, you could certainly do that, because the missing piece is sort of the procedural element, what you're calling the event, or what in the sort of IEEE 829 parlance would be called the procedure step, is the condition is, all right, well, these are kind of the inputs, or at least the things that should be true of the inputs, but then what do you do? So yeah, that's a very clever way of doing that, of just take the test case, take the decision table, add procedural element to it, and voila, you've got a logical test case, which is quite readable. So good suggestion, Keith. I really like that. That's anything that we can do to try to make our documentation load lighter and keep our work lightweight and focused on the doing of testing, not just the documenting of testing, is always a great idea. So I like that. And Keith continues, the other place where I found decision tables very helpful is in fleshing out requirements in Agile projects where the requirements are written as use cases. Yeah, I guess I could imagine how you could do that. If you've got user stories and you're trying to look at the different conditions that apply, then yeah, maybe you could combine those together. That's an interesting concept. Which, by the way, Keith, if you're inspired to do this, would make a great article for one of the many testing magazines, which we're lucky to have now. So, testing experience, or quality matters, or software test and performance, I'm sure would be very useful, or very interested in that. Well-written article on that, and I don't know, maybe better software as well. I'm not sure. They seem to be less test-focused than when they used to be software testing and quality engineering, but certainly we've got 3 really solid testing magazines available to us, and I think that they'd be interested in an article like this. So I'd suggest you take a look at doing that, because that'd be very helpful to people working on Agile projects. Let's see. Mark asks, would you use this for testing reports? Yeah, you certainly could. I mean, I think in a lot of cases reports are going to be transactional kinds of things, and it could be very useful for that kind of testing. And the classic cases are things like, as you saw, like credit card processing and ATMs and e-commerce sites and those sort of things. Any situation where a collection of data or inputs are gathered up, and then based on the conditions that are true of those inputs, a decision is made on how to act, fundamentally a transactional type of situation. So certainly that's transactional. And also, you can look at a given dialog box as, in a sense, transactional too. So there are a lot of like dialog box situations where you fill in fields in the dialog box and click OK, and then based on the input, certain things are supposed to happen, and then that can all be handled via decision tables as well. Marie says, thanks for all your guidance and info. Glad to be helpful to you, Marie. I enjoy doing these webinars, and I'm glad to hear that they are proving a useful resource. Let's see, Alexander comments on the use of decision tables and use cases. He says you can pull rules into decision table from the flow of a use case. So that's interesting. As I said, I've not really tried that. I've not really used those in combination. I've tended to use those separately. But I believe it, and I think this is another case where there's an interesting technique article hiding in here, Alexander, if you're interested in writing it. It's for one of the magazines that I mentioned, because I think being able to interrelate and transpose these techniques, use them in different situations is really the core of mastery of them, and so I'd encourage you, write an article about that. I'm sure people will be interested. 80 says, you exemplified with a small example. Yes, that's true. It's sort of a constraint of the PowerPoint format, is that there's only so much you can get on the screen at once. You start using something like Word, and these things get really painful. But yes, I agree with your fundamental point. So then you continue, how do decision tables apply for larger features? Decision tables will become huge and difficult to interpret. Are there any free tools that can manage and help with decision tables? Okay, well, that's true that the decision tables can get huge, but here's the thing to remember about a decision table is each column is pretty much independent of the others. Now, I say pretty much because there's this issue of the non-exclusive rules and there's possible combinations and so forth, but even those are tested independently. So what that means is that you really only have to read one column at a time when you're creating the test. So even if it is 200 columns wide in such a case, I've never seen one of those in practice. I suppose it obviously can happen if you've got a lot of conditions that combine together. But even if it is, say, 200 columns wide, remember, you're interested in one column at a time. And the generation of the conditions at the top, as I said before, is a purely mechanical process. So there's a lot less complexity there than you might think. And each set of actions taken under a given combination of rules, it's just correct for that combination of conditions. So while it can be big, it certainly is. I don't think there's a whole lot of difficulty in reading it because it's like a book in a way, right? A 1,000-page book is read exactly the same way as a 10-page book, one sentence at a time, right? And in the case of a 1,000-column decision table would be the same as reading a 10-column decision table. You read it one column at a time. So I wouldn't worry too much about them getting